Hello, I am back. Typically, this is a landscape photography related channel, but I've just been away from the channel for a bit while I've been moving, and I have returned now, and I'm going to start off by putting out a little bit of cinematic Becky and Chris inspired moving content. You may have heard that I recently moved, but this wasn't just any move. For me, this was starting a whole new chapter of life, living on my own for the first time, and building my personal lifestyle. Today, I'm going to take you along on a step of that journey and show you how I build a dining table to save money without compromising style. I've been absent for a while because moving is a huge process. For me, this was my first real move. My family moved once when I was very young, and I moved into a dorm for college. But this time I was moving all of my stuff from my parents' house to an apartment. And so not only was there a lot of stuff to move and reestablish in the new place, but I also was gaining a lot of rooms that needed to have furniture purchased and assembled to fill them. Let's rewind. I graduated from college several years ago and got a job, as you know from my intro, as a software developer. At that time, I moved back in with my parents and focused on saving money and paying off around $130,000 in student loan debt because private colleges in the US are extremely expensive. In the fall of this past year, I knew that I was getting close to having that loan paid off, giving me the money to find my own place. So I started finding an apartment and figuring out everything that I would need to have a smooth moving experience. There are a ton of things that you might not think about that go into moving out on your own. Selecting one at random based on how good it will look in this video. I really enjoy cooking and knives, and so I purchased a set of high carbon Damascus steel cooking knives off of Etsy. They did arrive relatively sharp, but I knew that I could get them sharper, and so over Thanksgiving weekend, in addition to spending time with my family, I spent several hours improving the edges on them. But an even bigger project that I did largely that weekend as well was building a dining table for my apartment. I've dabbled in a bit of furniture making here and there and made this desk among other things, and figured that I could fashion my own high quality modern dining table with benches much more cheaply than I could purchase a set. The total cost for the project came to around $500, which certainly is not cheap, but it is cheaper than a similar table would cost to buy pre-built. The parts list for this is very simple. 2 sets of metal bench legs, a set of matching table legs, 2 2x12 boards, and a piece of butcher block. For the finish, I used Varathane super glaze epoxy on top, some polyurethane underneath, and some Behr paint that is color matched to the bench legs for the benches. Now, one thing I should address in the otherwise straightforward design was that I opted to coat my butcher block top with epoxy. The traditional way to finish butcher block is to seal it with oil. That protects the wood from water damage and allows the surface to be used for cutting, hence the name butcher block. But for a table, I don't want to be cutting on it because that would scratch the table, and there are a couple of other downsides. One, you have to re-oil the table monthly and occasionally sand it as well. And two, there is some chance of staining, and I don't want to end up with coffee rings or wine stains all over my nice tabletop. The less conventional approach of applying a thick coat of epoxy gives the table a nice shiny finish and effectively puts it under a layer of plastic that protects it from damage or stains. The first step then was to apply the epoxy to the tabletop. Now, I had never used epoxy before, and it sounded like it would be easier than applying countless coats of polyurethane, but I found out online that if epoxy is not mixed correctly and then dried at the correct temperature, you risk it all not drying. Alright, so I've got my epoxy all ready to go here. I'm about ready to mix it up. To be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about actually applying it to this tabletop that I've got behind me here. So I've just been reviewing the directions for this really thoroughly and making sure that I'm all ready to go, because I don't know, it's a $200 piece of butcher block and I just don't want to mess it up by doing this epoxy wrong. I've never used epoxy before, and so I'm not the most comfortable with it. But I'm about to mix it up and pour it on, and hopefully everything goes well. Because it was Thanksgiving weekend in Ohio, it was a bit cold, and so I had to keep a heater running and monitor the temperature for a couple days to make sure that all 3 coats of my epoxy dried out. Fortunately though, they did all dry successfully, so after letting it cure for a few days, it was time to seal the bottom as well, just to make sure that no moisture got into the wood from the underside. There were lots of epoxy drips around the edges, so I took a knife and sliced them all off and then sanded them down with some sandpaper just to get it nice and smooth. Then I used some polyurethane to seal the bottom. The poly is a little easier to use than the epoxy, but it doesn't go down nearly as thick. For the bottom of the table, that was perfect because I didn't need a thick glossy finish, I just wanted it to be water sealed. With that done, the tabletop was finished and it was time for the 2 benches. Benches are easy to build, look nice and clean, and are cheaper and more flexible than chairs. They are less comfortable to sit on, but I don't want to sit at the table long after eating, so I decided that wasn't a major concern. The hardest part of making the benches was selecting 2 straight 2x12-inch boards. These are cheap yellow pine boards that are strong but are mostly used in construction where the quality of the board just doesn't matter that much. Once I had selected 2 good boards, from there it was a simple process of measuring, cutting, and painting. The story continues after moving into the new apartment when it was time to actually put the bench legs on the benches and the table legs on the table. Okay, so now I have all of the components of this table built. Well, actually I don't quite. I still need to make a second long bench because the board that I got was pretty twisty, but I have the one bench built, and then I just took some of the scrap and made another bench that I can put maybe in a hallway or something like that. And I'm probably going to use that as a guinea pig here to put the legs on the bottom now that everything's put together, test it all out, make sure that it works. So I'm going to screw the legs onto the bottom, which are in the boxes behind me. Now, I don't have a drill yet. There's a lot of things that I need to buy for my apartment, and so I'm going to try to just do this with the screwdriver today, and hopefully that'll work and be one less thing that I have to buy right away. If it doesn't work, I can get a drill. So yeah. Screws that came in this are very small, and it does have 5 screw openings across there, so hopefully that will be sufficient. My screwdriver and socket wrench with some gaff tape method, sort of slower than a drill, yes, definitely, but it doesn't cost $80 or something. It's completely free. I already have it here, and it's working relatively well. screws in to make sure that this leg stays straight while I put the other screws in. One of the ones that I put in was the end one. Right up at the edge of the board is where you're most likely to get a little bit of cracking. As you put a screw in, it can wedge your wood apart, so you have to be pretty careful with those. And so I watched it really closely while I was putting it in to make sure I wasn't cracking the edge of the tabletop, but it did go in really smoothly. It didn't crack anything. I could hear some kind of popping noises internally to the wood, but it still stayed really tight, didn't strip out the screw hole or break the edge of the board. So that's really good, and I feel a little bit better going forward with the other screws now that I've seen those ones go in really well. So I'm just gonna put those all in as fast as I can and stand this up. That's that, guys. I have a table. I think it took me probably about 2 hours to screw the screws in that way. Because some of them were really close to the leg, I don't know if I'd have been able to do them with a drill, at least without a special type of drill bit on it. But anyway, DIY projects are kind of a thing that you do when you have more time available than money available anyways, or you're more willing to spend time than money on something at least, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. You know, I've got some time available that I could do that, and I just have lots of other things I need to get for the apartment, things that I can't build, like a couch, and so this was a good way to save a little money by doing this. I think I got a table for probably about half the cost of what it would have been to get the same quality of table already made. So that's really nice. This will last a long time. It feels very sturdy. I was afraid that it might be a little bit wobbly, but there were so many of those little screws that it compensated for them being kind of small. It feels really strong. I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. And that's that. I am really happy with the way this table turned out. It does have a few imperfections, but not only does it not need to be perfect, but also those tell the story that I made this table myself. I spent some time building this, but it was a fun project, and I was rewarded for that effort with a table that is much nicer than I think I could have afforded to buy. What I want to leave you with, though, is that if there's a project that you're thinking about doing, just go for it. It might be a DIY project, a photography project, or something else, but you don't need to be an expert in something to do a little bit of research and accomplish something cool. Thank you guys all for being so patient over the past few months. I am super excited to get back to making new content. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and be on the lookout next week for a video about my move and a tour of the apartment. The following week for a full setup of my new studio, which I am in now. And then following that for regular landscape photography content as before. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.